Hi, everyone. I'm back for part two of our program. Again, just give me a moment to pull up our slides. I hope you are here to join me, and I hope you have digested what we learned in part one. If not, you can always go back and look at it again. I'm just going to share my screen, and we will be off and running for part two. Okay. All right. I'm hoping you're seeing what I'm seeing. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to be presenting the second part of our three-part series called Tackling Antiretroviral Resistance. In this part, you are going to become a super sleuth, a data processor, and most of all, much more comfortable in the clinical interpretation of antiretroviral resistance. At least that's what I'm hoping. So basically, compared to our learning objectives that I shared with you in the first part, we're going to be focusing mostly on the collection and then the interpretation of antiretroviral resistance. So in order to best provide you with the tools that you will need and show you how to use them, I've prepared a fictitious, heavily treatment experienced patient to help us. So our case has been HIV positive since 1994. So that is 30 years HIV positive. We would call this person a long-term survivor. Contrary to myself, who's called a long-term surviving treater. On this particular case is on their sixth antiretroviral regimen, and it consists of ritonavir boosted darunavir, a protease inhibitor, twice a day, raltegravir, a first-generation integrase inhibitor, twice a day, and etravirine, or etravirine, I will call it, a non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitor, twice a day. This particular regimen, which we referred to as the trio regimen back in the day, has kept this person undetectable for the last 8 years. So today, our patient has come to us and said, look, I've heard that there's some new things out there. I'm not expecting after all these years to have, the cream of the crop regimen, but is there any chance that you can give me something, maybe less pills, and maybe something that I can take only once a day instead of twice a day? So let's keep this patient in mind as we walk through our exercise in interpreting antiretroviral resistance. I promise you that the building of the best antiretroviral regimen for our case can be as easy as building this puzzle. And the puzzle pieces you can see consist of current mutations, previous mutations, predicted mutations, all gathered up and interpreted using an algorithm. But it's going to require some intuition, some detective work, and sometimes some educated guesses on your part. So let's look at our patient, and let's start with our first puzzle piece. Let's look at today's mutations if the viral load is currently detectable. Okay? If there was virus detected, which we usually repeat a viral load if it's detectable and make sure it's not just a one-time blip. But if there was virus detected, you would have to assume that the current regimen was not working and there was a viral breakthrough, and you would send it to off for genotyping. Ideally, you need a minimum of 500 copies per mil, or preferably 1,000 copies or more, to be able to have enough virus to sequence for resistance. But let's get back to this particular case. Our patient is currently undetectable, remember, for the last 8 years. Not only can we not do this genotype on this because we don't have enough virus to grow, we can also assume that this triple regimen that he is taking twice a day is working, and that there's activity from the current combination and doses of drugs because they are and have been for the last 8 years suppressing his virus. So before we move on to our next piece of the puzzle, I just want to go back to something that I introduced you to at the very end of part one, and that is where to look on resistance genotype reports. Because in order for us to now investigate any archived resistance, we're going to have to find these reports. So remember, the NNRTIs and the NRTIs, which are shown at the top of this, are one class, are one set of mutations that will confer resistance somehow or other to against reverse transcriptase. So they are kind of lumped together. And you will find these mutations, which are the combination of numbers and letters, which I explained in part one, that you will find these mutations above the list of the drug names. You will also find, I will also, at this particular point in time, we'll take a minute to say, on the right-hand side of every resistance report, you're going to see a synopsis that says minimal response, reduced response, maximal response, completely resistant, like you're seeing on this particular form in the color-coded on the right. If you have only one antiretroviral regimen ever used, there's been a viral breakthrough, and this is the genotype you happen to be getting back based on that viral breakthrough, and it's one report only on one antiretroviral regimen only, you can use this simple tactic of determining which drugs would be good or not good in this particular patient as we move forward. Whenever there's been more than one regimen and that has not completely suppressed the virus, you're only looking at a snapshot in time with one report at a time. And that snapshot is taking a peek at what viral resistance is developing under the drug pressure of that particular snapshot in time. I hope that makes sense. I also want to remind you that you will find these mutations down below the list of drugs in some of our current genotype reporting. You will also notice at the top of this report in the second column underneath at the very bottom row, something called clade. We also refer to that as subtype. And subtype may become important to understand a little more about in our next part 3, where we talk about resistance pathways. But this is one of the only places where you can ever see the subtype or clade of HIV, and that is on a genotype report. So clade C in this particular case, just for the record, most commonly seen in North America is clade or B or subtype B. You see a lot of clade C in other countries like Africa, India. You also see other clades in other parts of the world, but where there's, believe it or not, there's not a lot of subtype B. But Europe and North America, we tend to see more HIV subtype B, and that is where in the resource-rich settings where most of our testing has been developed based on that. So let's go back to our case. Now we're going to work on our yellow piece of the puzzle, where we're going to look at the previous mutations from all available genotypes. So let's assume that we've done our homework, we've gone to the chart, and we've gathered any previous genotype reports we have on file. So now the recording begins. And literally you see that I have a little picture of a scratch pad here. And I can honestly say that to this day, this is the best way to collect any and all mutation data before we use an online algorithm for interpretation. You're basically going to make a column called RT, or reverse transcriptase, and all the NRTI and NNRTI resistance mutations you find will go in that column. You're going to make a column called PI, which stands for protease inhibitors, and all of the resistance mutations you see on genotypes conferring protease resistance will go in that column. And then your third column will obviously be for integrase inhibitors, and you will find any integrase inhibitor resistance mutations and record them in that column. So why is this important? If you look at this particular case, you can see that in 2000, he had a virological breakthrough on nevirapine, DDI, and D4T, developed the following mutations. They're only RT mutations because he's only on a non-nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitor with two nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors. And by 2002, he's had a breakthrough on a unboosted PI regimen. So you've amassed a few PI mutations. Some of the RT mutations are there and some are missing. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And then you would go to the 2003 report, you would go to the 2007 report, and basically at the end of your detective mission, you would have had all these mutations written down in the appropriate columns. Why is this important? You'll notice that sometimes the mutations persist from one genotype to the next genotype, but sometimes they're missing. And this is a very important time for me to remind you that a genotype is a snapshot in time that reflects the current drug pressure of that time. Whatever is growing under that particular drug pressure. But as I stated in part 1 of this module, once resistance breaks through, it is archived forever. And just because our current regimen may not be applying pressure to see a mutation on a genotype, it is always possible that archive resistance can emerge again as a dominant species under the right drug conditions again. Once it's there, it's always there, and that is why we must do this detective work and uncover any and all possible past and present mutations. So you might ask yourself, okay, how do I know if I have all of the data? Perhaps you see a detectable viral load at a time in the patient's history that has no corresponding record of a genotype being done. Perhaps you've inherited a patient from another center and have not yet received some or all of the chart. In Canada, other than Quebec, genotypes are done at the BC Genotype Lab. They're very willing to help you track down genotype information based on some patient specifics like birth date, initials, some of their provincial health numbers, etc. I've included their number on this side, but they can easily be reached by a simple search under BC Genotype Lab. If your patient has had genotyping done in other centers like Quebec, most would be very accommodating in helping you complete your archived mutation list. So you can always go back to laboratories that most likely would have done genotyping for you to make sure that you've got all your bases covered if you're really concerned that you're missing some data. But now we get to the trickiest part of this puzzle. How do we predict which mutations there may be if we do not have a genotype available to us? Well, let's talk about our case again. Remember, our patient has been positive for 30 years, diagnosed in 1994. Triple therapy was not available until the earliest 1995 and more likely 1996. Genotypes were not available until the very earliest 1999. If you go back in this patient's history, it reveals that he received dual therapy in the early years when we only used two nucleoside analogs with AZT and 3TC. My prediction for this case, therefore, would be to add an M184V, which is the most likely resistance mutation to occur in 3TC or lamivudine failure, and a 210W, which is the one thymidine analog that would likely have occurred that is missing when I do my archived work. I promise I will get back to this before you panic and wonder, how do I know that? Because these are things that we're going to talk a lot more in detail in part 3. But for now, I just want you to know the next steps in our puzzle building, because now we're going to start to be using some of the tools that are available to us. And the next step is to put all of our pieces together. Okay, so we're going to take no mutations from today. the green piece of the puzzle, all of the previous mutations from available genotypes, any predicted historical mutations that where they might have occurred when we have no genotypes available to us or it's missing data. And then we're going to plug them into an online calculator. So this is kind of what our particular case's scratchpad may look like. Under reverse transcriptase, we've recorded any or all mutations that we have found on all archived genotypes. Under protease, we've done the same thing. And in this particular case, this person has never had any failing regimens containing integrase inhibitors, and therefore we assume he has no integrase resistance. So now what do we do? Well, we all might better be in agreement at this point that any chance of archived resistance mutations is key when considering any change or adjustment in antiretroviral, and that all pieces of the treatment puzzle must be carefully analyzed, documented, tallied, and then interpreted by an expert. But the experts can use tools that are available to us, like the Stanford database. The Stanford University HIV drug resistance database is your best friend when it comes to designing new antiretroviral regimens. It allows one to enter either a mutational list or a sequence. It offers also an online analysis and comparison and a report based on 3 reputable world-known algorithms. On this particular slide, I have shown you the entire web address to get to this database. But seriously, if you just remember HIVDB and the DB standing for database, and you plug that into your browser, you will definitely come to this page. The HIV drug resistance database. Before I show you the most simple part of this that we're going to use as our tool for building antiretroviral regimens, if this topic tweaks your melon even remotely like it does mine, anything you'd ever need to know about single mutations, combination mutations, mutation scores, fold changes, phenotypes versus genotypes, any more in-depth knowledge you might want for yourself, you can learn on this particular website. So keep that in mind for your future learnings. Again, this is a 101 program, so I'm trying to teach anybody and everybody how to do this kind of quick and efficiently. But really, if you want to know the nitty-gritty behind all of this, this is your best starting place for any information. It's the most thorough program ever existing for understanding HIV drug resistance, and I highly suggest you delve into it a little deeper. But what we're going to do today is really focus on this one little part of the first page of the website, and that is the actual HIVDB program. So you're going to click here, and then this is what you're going to see. It's going to take you to a single page that looks like this. And then it's going to basically, you're just going to scroll down this page on the website. You're not having to do any more clicking. You're going to scroll down this page until you get to a column, a part in the table, which lists the type of drug. In this case, it's the reverse transcriptase class. Okay, so remember your RT column on your scratch pad. Then you're going to find the mutation. Let's say, for example, I've clicked on 67. And then under the number, remember I told you it's about the number and the letter. You find the number, you click the drop-down menu that's affiliated with that number. And in this case, let's say it drops down and N is a choice and your particular scratch pad shows a 67N mutation. This is what you would now pick, and it will now start to record these into this database. And you're basically going to repeat that for all other noted mutations under RT. You're going to go down the page a bit more, find the protease groups, then your scratch pad list of protease mutations. You're going to do the exact same thing and enter them here. And you're going to do the exact same thing if you have any integrase resistance mutations here. Find the number, drop it down, pick the letter. It's as easy as that. And then guess what? All you got to do is click Analyze. And now you have a sum total of snapshots of clinical experience of antiretroviral therapy, a sum total of possibly archived existing resistance that is now going to be interpreted. And this is what you're going to see. Now, just to finish our particular case, I did plug in the numbers from our particular case in order to show you these examples. Now, remember, our case came to us on a regimen of twice a day boosted darunavir, twice a day raltegravir, and twice a day etravirine, and is asking for a simplification, maybe something once a day. Okay? So, under our protease inhibitors, we are now getting a report that tells us that although the mutations that we coded in are showing intermediate resistance to atazanavir and lopinavir, first generation PIs, these particular mutations leave a virus still completely susceptible to darunavir. So the darunavir in this case would not have to be continually taken twice a day. If you give darunavir once a day, you may even be able to put it with cobicistat instead of ritonavir and give it as one pill. Or you can give it with darunavir tablet with a one tablet of ritonavir boost. But it can be given once a day because there's full susceptibility to darunavir in this case. Our RT report is a little bit different. As you can see, with all of the background history of subtherapeutic levels of nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors, our patient doesn't get a lot of benefit from nucleoside analogs any longer, but he's also not currently on any nucleoside analogs. So, NRTIs, sorry, he's on a non-nuke, but not an NRTI. So, we don't have to be too concerned about a simplification here. He is showing some high-level resistance to all of the nucleoside analogs. But as far as the non-nukes go, he is currently taking etravirine. And if you see on the form in front of you here, under etravirine, it's showing some intermediate resistance. And we can actually do better by simplifying this person to a one pill once a day doravirine in this particular case, because it's showing the full susceptibility. So now we've simplified the darunavir and we've simplified the doravirine. Now, as far as the integrase inhibitors go, this particular person has never taken integrase inhibitors that have failed in the past. So we're assuming any or all integrase inhibitors would be beneficial. He's taking currently a one tablet twice a day regimen of a first generation integrase inhibitor. We would probably simplify that and modernize that to a more potent, more durable second generation integrase inhibitor. You could add dolutegravir. Some people may even be comfortable with doing something like Prescobix and Biktarvy. But the bottom line is, can we meet this person's expectations of simplifying their regimen and of making things a little bit easier to take as far as timing throughout the day? The answer to that is yes, but we would never have made that assumption until we did this homework. So I'm hoping that that makes sense to you by using this case as an example. One other thing I wanted to point out is when you get that analyzed report, underneath where it's showing you the intermediate, susceptible, or resistant, highly resistant summaries, you get comments. Again, this is where you learn. If you read these comments, they're very, very, very informative. And when you start to wonder, gee, I don't know anything about, like, let's say an L74 mutation. This is where I kind of started my basic learning, was just reading the comments that came back with some of these resistance reports, because you can learn an awful lot by what they tell you in here. For example, if you look under the NNRTI, it's telling you that the Y181C, which was the only NNRTI resistance mutation that we reported for this particular case that I shared with you, may confer high-level resistance to nevirapine and intermediate resistance to etravirine and rilpivirine, but it doesn't reduce any doravirine susceptibility at all. So that's just kind of reassurance that you simplifying to something like doravirine in this case may have been gives you a lot more insurance that you made the right decision. Also, if you look down further, This virus is predicted to have intermediate reduced susceptibility to rilpivirine. And now that we have a long-acting injectable that consists of cabotegravir, a second generation or almost a second generation integrase inhibitor with rilpivirine, they're telling you in this particular case, it should be contraindicated. So this would not be a viable switch if he happened to come in that day and say, can I go on the injectable? Right? So reading these notes is something I don't want you to ignore. And it also does help you become even more confident in your predictions as you go forward as a resistance interpreter. But in closing, I promised that I would get back to this most difficult piece of the puzzle. If you recall, I made the prediction, and I apologize for that ringing in the background. It's just going to go to message. If you recall, I made the prediction based on not having a genotype from early days of dual therapy with AZT and 3TC. Knowing that those early regimens were not reliably virologically suppressive and that there was likely some archived resistance from this era. But how and why do I know this? Well, I hope you will continue to part 3, because this is where I'm going to share some tips on resistance mutations and pathways that may help you feel more confident in the educated guesswork that's required to complete this puzzle work. Again, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I apologize to you for that background noise, but I appreciate your attention. I hope you are beginning to feel a little more confident in the area of resistance. I hope you are starting to feel a little bit like more of a resistance expert at the end of the second part of this series. And I look very forward to sharing our third and final part of our educational series very soon. Thank you so much for joining me again. We'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.